Today's World Insight with Tianwei. Chinese Vice Premier Liu He in Washington for trade discussion. What are the expectations? We ask business leaders on both sides.
Western society is really changing.
Talk on China is so strong.
And investments in the high-tech sector and a picture of resilience. In the words of a longtime American investor in China and the top exec of travel agency C-Trip.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tianwei, coming to you live on CGTN. We begin with the upcoming trade talks between China and the United States. Vice Premier Liu He is leading a Chinese delegation which has arrived in Washington. It includes more than 10 of China's senior officials. Among them is the governor of the People's Bank of China, the vice finance minister, the vice chair of the National Development and Reform Commission. And also American Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said Monday the White House expected to make significant progress during the talks with Liu He, who is also expected to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump. So what's the expectation for this round of trade discussions between the two sides? Can both sides work toward satisfying results? Today, we are bringing you a special program featuring well-established business leaders both from China and the United States for their insights right before the talk. First, let's meet Steven Schwarzman, the chairman and CEO of Blackstone Group. I talked to him in an exclusive interview on the sideline of the World Economic Forum, which just concluded in Davos. Let's listen in. Mr. Schwarzman, what a pleasure to have you on CGTN.
Well, it's good to see you again.
Among the hustling and bustling World Economic Forum, some crucial questions about China-U.S. leading up to that discussion the end of January. What can we expect?
Well, I think you have to start back with the meeting with the two presidents, President Xi and President Trump in Argentina. And from everything I understand, that was a very successful meeting. It was extremely well handled by President Xi, and it was extremely well received by President Trump and the U.S. group. And so now there have been regular discussions between the two countries. They're following up on the issues that President Xi put on the table. Apparently those issues are going quite well. And there are other issues that are of concern to the U.S. side, which will have more complexity from a Chinese perspective. And those are things that will be discussed over the next month.
How do you see it, Mr. Schwarzman? I mean, you're a business person, you're very familiar with numbers. So 90 days vis-a-vis 40 years relationship. That's an interesting combination, isn't it?
Well, there's a lot of pressure on that. And I think the reason is that you know, it's been 2 years since President Trump took office. American terms are 4 years. So if you don't start making real progress, what happens if you don't get elected president again? The whole issue goes away. And so it's not necessarily as practical as it should be. But there's some basic things that you can figure out, since everybody's been thinking about these issues for a long time.
Mr. Schwarzman, the question is whether voices coming from the business community, those are trying to create bridges, are being appreciated by both sides or by one specific side. And meanwhile, whether your voices are still that relevant anymore in the overall grand picture of social change, I have to say.
Well, the Western society is really changing. You know, there's much more populism in different countries in the West. In the U.S., for example, which I've shared with President Xi, half of U.S. people, even though our GDP per capita is $50,000 and China's is $10,000, half of our population can't write a $400 check. They don't have the savings for an emergency. which means they live paycheck to paycheck. So these people are not happy with the system, and it's not a U.S. problem. That problem you can see in France with their protests. You can see it in the UK with Brexit. Dissatisfaction is creating different voices in the West.
Of course, the Chinese Vice President Mnuchin, he was interacting with Professor Schwab at a conversation at the World Economic Forum. He talked about if there is an imbalance, you use development to address the imbalance, rather than just fighting over the already existing unlimited pie. You made a bigger pie. But I wonder whether that concept is that well accepted by the arguments from the other side, Mr. Schwarzman.
Well, the reason it isn't as well accepted is that half of the population has basically said, I don't have the patience to have that pie developed. I've been waiting for someone to mix the ingredients, and they tell me they've been mixing the ingredients, and they told me we put the pie in the oven. But I've never gotten the pie. So telling me to wait to get the pie isn't as attractive.
Who should make that pie?
Well, the pie has to be made by each country, and it has to be made based on the character of the people and their education and their other resources. And the education system in the West, which used to be really terrific at the primary and secondary levels, has gotten weaker. And so the solution for this problem on a medium-term basis is simply to give the best education possible. And there are many educational institutions in the United States, for example, that can take the same students that are not doing well in some schools, and when you move them to another, they do very well. And so we need to fix our education system, particularly for the new artificial intelligence and internet world. It's mandatory that we fix this.
Talking about education, you are extremely passionate about that. The Schwarzman Scholars, for example, is a beautiful demonstration of that. Of course, Rome is not built in one day. I know you are constantly working on that project with your Chinese colleagues. Having said that, though, what if things are getting unpredictable?
Well, I think there needs to be a greater buy-in by the younger generation, if you will, which is, I think, what you were asking, in terms of where their society is going, whether they are prepared to succeed in that community.
But as we know, people are talking about decoupling, for example, between China and the United States. That includes the academic exchanges. That includes educational exchanges as well. How worried are you about that?
Well, I worry about anything that really can change a balance of things. And
what is this balance you're talking about, for example, between China and the United States?
Well, I'm talking, you asked a limited question, you know, on Chinese students going to the United States, and to much lesser degree U.S. students going to China. And I think there's, you know, some argument to be made that if the U.S. is educating so many Chinese students and they go back and become very successful, then what's fair and equitable is that the U.S. should have very good access to the Chinese economy so they can compete. If there is a perception, forget the reality, if there is a perception that you educate all the Chinese students at the university level, where the U.S. is number one in the world, and then all you're doing is sending them back to China, where they become enormous successes, and then don't give access that's equitable to the U.S., then that seems unfair.
So you are saying to me, Mr. Schwarzman, that perceptions are even more important than realities.
I'm saying they're both. And so one of the reasons why it's important for China to proceed with the opening that they've announced and accelerate it, if you will, is that it creates that balance where you educate Chinese people,
Right.
But they go back, they help their country, but their country is open for the U.S. people as well to be able to commercially compete. If the funnel only goes more or less one way, then you might get a reaction.
Well, of course, the counter argument might be from China is that maybe somebody is already trying to close the door on China, and that would create difficulties in China to further open the door to many American businesses.
But I think it's the job of the grown-ups to make sure that doesn't happen.
Right. Finally, before you go, Mr. Schwarzman, we see different generations of communicators. For example, Dr. Henry Kissinger, he's already in his 90s, and we also see other generation, and you belong to the latest generation that have access to both sides. Maybe one is not necessarily one administration, but certainly overall. How do you think your role as a communicator, and how are you balance your role between these two greatest countries of the world and the two greatest economies?
Well, first, Henry Kissinger is 95, and he still flies all over the world.
Absolutely.
He's still writing books, and he's still thinking very clearly. So good for Henry. He's done an amazingly wonderful thing for China and the United States. I look at my role. I'm lucky enough to know the Chinese leaders and the U.S. leaders, and I look at the opportunity to make sure that they're communicating well, that nobody emotionally gets engaged in something they shouldn't, and that I found in my professional career there's always what I call a zone of fairness, which is what works for both sides of a situation. I am an American, and so in that sense, you know, I have a sympathy with the American view. I am also a friend of China, and I understand the Chinese view and what the Chinese system can adjust to. And if you can help in any way get the overlap so that change can happen on a basis that accommodates both systems, then that's a very good role. And it's important to me that that works out well. And I spend a lot of time doing it. And I'm happy and proud to do that, because just an accident of fate, I'm lucky enough to be able to serve people. I don't do this for money. I don't. Of course. I do it because it's the right thing, and as long as I can be helpful to both countries, I like to do it. And so far, that's worked out pretty well. So I hope these discussions result in something positive for both countries.
Okay, Mr. Schwarzman, it's always a pleasure talking to you, helping us to see the lights at the end of the tunnel. Well,
there's always a light at the end of the tunnel, particularly if the tunnel is short.
All right, let's hope for that. Mr. Schwarzman, what a pleasure. Thank you so much, sir.
Great.
Our special thanks to Steven Schwarzman. From the Chinese side, Zhang Xin, the CEO and co-founder of SOHO China, she is also expressing her views about the upcoming trade talks. She also talked to us on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum. The China-U.S. trade talks, according to her, is on everybody's mind. Many business leaders regarded it as one of the major causes of uncertainty this year. Let's listen in.
Talk on China is so strong. Like the last 2 days, every dinner, every lunch, every panel that I've been to, dominated the conversation is U.S.-China relations.
That's right.
And 70% of the talk is about U.S.-China relations. That's how important it is. And China obviously uses this platform as a great way to advocate for globalization. You know, we are a export-oriented country, and it is important for our economy to continue to connect with the rest of the world. So this is a particularly interesting and important platform for us.
And of course, we're leading up to the so-called 90 days, you know, March the 1st. This is a time when China and the United States sat together about a time for discussion.
Right.
While we are leading up to it, how do you think the communication here might help both the communication bilaterally, because after all, there are many American delegations, particularly from the business community here, and also multilaterally for others to understand what's really going on and what's the real essence.
Well, I think particularly because we have this trade talk going on, and you know, all eyes are on U.S.-China now. And U.S. administration this year is absent, so nobody from U.S. government administration is here. But the U.S. business has always had a strong presence here. I think any level of communication, be it government, NGO, business, media, is important. You know, this communication is multi-level anyway.
Right.
And you know, the more we communicate, the more we know at a human level, the better it is.
Yes, it is. And you are being a communicator throughout the years on the World Economic Forum for that as well, Xin, I have to say. On the other hand, what about the economy? I mean, you talk about the uncertainty. So it's not just uncertainty about the growth rate. It's also the quality of growth, as well as geopolitics on the growth. But on the other hand, people are saying, well, maybe the picture is not that bad. It's only unpredictability.
Right.
So at this moment, how do you see China's economy as someone from the private sector?
Well, we had a tough year, right? 2018 is a particularly challenging year. We had one of the slowest GDP growth rate in the last close to 30 years. We felt it, you know, at the private sector you felt it, because we at SOHO China, we lease space, we sell buildings, so we know, how companies are doing on a day-to-day basis. And I think companies are very concerned with growth and with bottom line, cost control, and especially the middle of, all the way to the middle of last year, because our government policy was debt constrained, controlling debt, so we could deleveraging, the supply side reform. So all of that was felt by the private sector. Even for us, we as a real estate developer pledging our buildings to borrow money, which should be the safest for most of the banks, right? At the time, we almost had a hard time to refinance our existing debt. I was very surprised to see what's going on. Then of course by October everything changed. Our CFO came back and said, look, everything is fine, no need to worry about it, and banks are lending again. So clearly the government felt with the data showed that our economy slowed up.
So it's
and right away, this is a great thing about Chinese government policies, it's always very adaptive. Right away it changed.
There's a lot of things going on right now, as you said, because a lot of numbers coming out at the same time, the momentum as well. So how do you see the debate going on in China and beyond about, on the one hand, make sure the quality of growth as always, as it was advocated. On the other hand, make sure also the growth rate can be maintained within certain range, and therefore the economy can still progress with the expectations. So how do you see this debate, this balance?
Look,
it's tricky, isn't it?
I think China never really had an issue of growth rate. I think this is the one thing our central banker knows what to do. With the right policy, it's still very much a policy-driven economy. That they see tightened is having too much of an effect, they will change, and then they would, and right away you will see the opposite effect. So I think growth rate, yes, we had 6.4, the fourth quarter last year, but you will see a growth better than that, I think, in this year, because right away with the ease of a credit is the quickest and the easiest way to see the impact on the growth rate. Now, quality of growth is a different issue, right? Quality of growth is about our productivity, and our productivity for the last few years has been dropping. So that is concern, and that's to do with a lot of things. What drives productivity? Technology drives productivity, and efficiency drives productivity. We need reforms. We need technological innovation. We need SOE reforms. We need efficiency. Coming up with the people are expecting the tax cut. Yeah. That's going to help too, because that will help the efficiency. But I think generally, it is a worrying element of our economy that where our productivity is dropping. And I think it's great that we're very focused on this, and hopefully that something would happen with a better policy.
Right. Well, you're seeing 2019 is still unpredictable for now.
Yes.
So many wonder, particularly those in your sector and beyond, what's going to be the growth engine?
Because I'm actually optimistic about 2019.
All right. Why? Tell me why about.
Because, I know for my 25 years, being a developer in China, I know one thing is that one credit eases, we'll have a good year. One credit tightens, we'll have a challenging year. Last year was a tighten. This year will be an ease. So I think in business we will see a better year this year.
Interesting. And you don't see that much what is going on between China and the United States eventually?
Oh, no, we do. I do. Because, of course, this trade talk is important, and we need to get the deal done. The Trump administration has this $200 billion, this thing hanging there as a way to challenge us. I think we do need the deal to get done, and I see that they're very focused and very intensely, negotiating on that. Well, we're having a challenging moment for U.S.-China relations, and especially for a business person like me, who has been, very active in the cross-border business. We have this trade talk between U.S.-China, and the rhetoric so far has been quite challenging. And I think that makes it difficult as a business person to make a decision. Should we do or should we not do?
Uncertainty.
A lot of uncertainty. A lot of uncertainty on how would the trade deal end. Actually, beyond the trade deal is how would the U.S.-China relations really be in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Zhang Xin, it's always a pleasure talking to you, especially here on the World Economic
Forum.
Thank you so much.
Great
All the best.
To see you.
Good to see you.